All right, so now we're ready for Chapter 1, Lesson 9. This finishes up all of Chapter 1. We're going to do a review day tomorrow, and then we're going to have a test next week. So as we go through this, if there's any questions that you think about that you have over all of Chapter 1, please write them down tonight as you're doing your homework, so that when we get into our review session tomorrow, we can review it, and then next week you'll be ready for your test. So if you get out your paper that I gave you, the very first day we started doing decimals, which was Chapter 1, Lesson 6, then you can look at it and go through what we did. The very first day, Lesson 6, we did adding and subtracting of decimals, lining them up, filling it with zeros, bringing our decimal down, adding and subtracting. Then the second column was multiplication, where we have to multiply first, count decimal spaces, not decimal points, and then moving our decimal from right to left however many times we need to. The previous lesson, Lesson 9 then, or Lesson 8, was dividing a decimal by a whole number. Just simply raising that decimal straight up and making sure we divide. This lesson takes us a step even further. We're going to divide a decimal number, which will be our dividend, by a decimal number, which is our divisor. Now, I'm going to start this lesson by telling you it's an impossible thing to do. I cannot divide by a decimal. I can't have a decimal number in my divisor. However, we have steps to remember how to do it correctly and be able to get to our right answer. So when you start on this page, you'll notice that we've got these little arrows showing stuff moving over. Our process that we're always going to follow is an OOU. So if you start getting these letters into your head, OOU, then you're going to remember your process. OOU stands for over, over, up. It's the first letter of each of those three words. It is a three-step process that must be followed if there is a decimal point in my divisor. If there's not a decimal point in my divisor, I just do my last step, raise it up, and I divide. But these are all going to have decimal points as my divisor. I have to go over, then I have to go over, then I have to go up. Now what that means is, when my divisor has a decimal, I have to move my decimal point over from left to right until it's a whole number. If there's one decimal space, I move it one time from the left to the right. If there's two decimal spaces, guess what? 2 times. If there's 3, I move it 3 times. That takes care of having a whole number as my divisor. But that throws off my answer. So I have to remember that if I do that on the outside, I also have to do it on the inside. So if there isn't a whole number on the inside, or if there's a whole number on the inside, then I just put my decimal at the end and I start moving and adding zeros. Okay? But as we first start out, we're going to see that we have numbers in our decimal positions. But if I move it once on the outside, I have to move it once on the inside in the same direction. If I move it twice on the outside, then I move it twice on the inside. 3 times and 3 times, so on and so forth. However many times I move it on the outside to make my whole number, I do the same on the inside no matter what. If that leaves a decimal on the inside of the box in my dividend, that's fine, because I know I can divide a decimal by a whole number. Once I've moved it and moved it, so I do my over and my over, then I raise it straight up so I know it ends up where it's supposed to belong in my division problem. So once I move it straight up, I'm good to go. So remember, moving it once, raising it up. Moving it twice and twice, straight up. 3 times and 3 times, straight up. 4 times, 6 times, 100 times. Doesn't matter how many times there are in the divisor, I have to make it a whole number. So when I look at this math problem, I notice that they moved it 1 time on the outside, so my 3.5 became 35. If I moved it once on the outside, I move it once on the inside. So my 66.5 becomes 665. So then I just have a whole number divided by a whole number. But I raise my decimal up, so I know that if I have any remainders, that my decimal will be in the right place. When I start to divide, though, I can see that 35 will go into 66 1 time. So 1 times 35 is 35, and when I subtract, I end up with 31. I would bring my 5 down, and 35 goes into 315 9 times, because 9 times 35 is 315. so I have a 0 remainder. So going from a decimal and a decimal, I end up with a whole number of 19. When I look at my practice problems that have been set up, then I start with this one up here. So notice I have 3 decimal spaces in my dividend and 1 in my divisor. I can't have 1 in my divisor, so I got to do my OOU. I have to do it over on the outside. I have to do it over on the inside the same number of times, and then I bring it up. Now that's going to be key when I said the same number of times. So when I look at my OOU and I know I have to go over and over and up, this has to move over 1 time to make it a whole number. Now, what I have students often doing is they try to just make both of them whole numbers. Can't make them both whole numbers. I can only move on the inside the same number of times I did on the outside. I moved it once, so I'm only going to move it 1 time on the inside, and then OOU, raise it straight up. Once again, on these problems, it's important that I'm really doing my best to make neat math. If I need the lined paper, there's tons of it over here. Please come and get it, use it, that's what it's there for. Line everything up nice and neat as you're dividing so you don't get a wrong answer. This is where also my handy dandy calculator becomes quite important, because I'm telling you right now, I don't do mental math where I'm thinking, well, 148 will go into 994 times this many times. My brain doesn't work that way. I don't deal with big numbers. I get my own calculator and I divide. And I see that 148 will go in 994.6 times. Because when I do it, I end up with 6 point stuff, right? Get rid of that stuff and keep my 6. 6 times 148, I don't know what that is off the top of my head. I get my calculator. I type in 148 times 6 equals. I get 888. Now I can subtract. When I subtract those, I get a remainder of 106. That is smaller than 148, so I know I'm on the right track. So now I bring down my next digit. My next digit is a 5. So now I type in my handy dandy calculator, 1065 divided by 148 equals, and I get 7 point stuff. Get rid of the stuff. 7 times 148 is 1036, because I type it into my calculator and I see what that is, and then I can subtract. My remainder is 29. Now I'm going to bring down my last one. Notice every time I show my arrows so I know that I'm using every digit and I'm doing it correctly. So now I have 296. If I type that in, divided by 148, I'm going to see it goes in 2 even times, because 2 times 148 is 296. So I don't have a remainder. If I did, I would never put an R with a number, just like I said in the last video. I would add a 0 and bring it down, and I'd keep dividing until I don't have a remainder. They made this one nice and neat for you. It is just 6 7200ths, or 6.72. All right, so now on this one, I already have it set up for you. Once again, my first number is always my dividend. It is inside my division box. My second number is always my divisor. It's on the outside of the box. And then I notice I have a decimal on the outside, which I cannot mathematically do. So I'm going to do my OOU. I'm going to go over on the outside, move it over on the inside the same number of spaces, then I can raise my decimal up. So on the outside, I have to go 2 times to make it a whole number. So I move it twice. I have to do the same thing on the inside. So I'm going to move it twice. Then I'm going to raise my decimal up. Once it's in the right spot, then I can start doing my math. 135 will not go into 1. 135 will not go into 10. 135 will not go into 108. So now I'm going to type into my calculator 1080 divided by 135 equals, and I'm going to see 8, because 8 times 135 is indeed 1080. So it's an even number. It's 8 even dollars. Now, on a dollar answer, if you want to add 0.00, you are more than welcome to. $8 with the decimal point or without the decimal point is still $8. If there was any change at all, I'd have to add the decimal sign and keep the change. But since it's a whole number, I count the answer either way. either as $8 without the decimals or $8 with the decimal and the 2 zeros to hold the dimes and the pennies. All right, question 3. So which one would go inside my division box? Once again, my first number is always my dividend. My second number is always my divisor. So I have inside the box and outside the box. I have a decimal on the outside the box, which I cannot do. I have my OOU written on my paper. See, I wrote it on my paper, so you should have written it on yours. If you haven't, please do so now, so that when you go to do your homework, you'll look at it and say, oh yeah, I need to have that up there so I remember my steps. So I have to do my over, over, up. How many times will I move it on the outside to make it a whole number? I have to go 2, right? Because there's 2 decimal spaces. That means I have to go 2 on the inside, but then I have a problem. I only have 1 decimal space. Well, if I have to go 2, I have to go 2, which tells me I'm going to add a 0 to hold that place value. If it tells me I have to go 2 on the outside, then I have to go 2 on the inside. Even if this was a whole number, I would add a decimal point and I'd add 2 zeros. Once I've moved it 2 and 2, that's my over, over. Now I got to go straight up. So I put it in the right spot in order to start my math. Once again, big numbers, I'm going to use my calculator every single time. Will 176 go into 2? No, won't go into 26, but it will go into 264 because it's larger than the 176. Well, how many times? Well, it goes in 1 time. So 1 times 176 is 176. Then I subtract. Once again, calculator. 264 minus 176 equals, and I'm going to get 88. Then I'm going to bring down my 0. How many times does 176 go into 880? It's going to go in 5 times, because 5 times 176 is 880. Once again, I don't have a remainder. So I'm just going to have a whole number of 15. This is where I am not ever going to keep my decimal. If I have money, I can have a decimal with the zeros, never just a decimal by itself. On a whole number, I never keep a decimal with my answer. Some of you, that's been overlooked, I realize, in the past couple of years. I'm very particular that numbers look like numbers. So if you have a decimal at the end of the 15, it's not a proper number. Because I don't say 15 and, because every time I have a decimal, I say the word and. 15 and what? Well, there's nothing to follow. So I will not keep my decimal at the end of my 15. It's fine that it's here in my work because I raised it up where it was supposed to be. But when I write my answer, I make sure that it is a proper number. Question 4. Already set up inside my division box. I see there's a decimal space on the outside that automatically tells me I have to follow my OOU. How many times do I have to move it to make a whole number? Just once, right? So I move it 1 time. Once again. On the inside, I only move it the same number of times that I did on the outside. Don't move it over to make it a whole number also. If I move it once on the outside, I move it once on the inside. It goes right between the 0 and 7, then I raise it straight up. Now I can divide. 87 will not go into 5, will not go into 53, but it will go into 530. So when I do it on my handy dandy calculator, I type in 530, divide by 87, I get 6. 6 and stuff, so I got to get rid of the stuff, but I keep my 6. The 6 times 87 is 522. When I subtract those, I get an 8, right? And then I bring down my 7. It's the same number. That's what my divisor is. So 87 goes into 87 1 time. So my final answer is just going to be, without a remainder, 6 and 1/10. All right. All the way back to the order of operations. Take a look at number 9 real quick. On number 9, all of these order of operations we've had parentheses until that one. That's why it's important that we understand our order of operations and exactly what it's saying. We'll look at that when we get to it. So number 8, I know I have asked for several extra presents. Absolute value, square roots, exponents are not there, so I'm left with my parentheses. I'm going to use my parentheses and I'm going to do that step first. But notice, I've got 2 math steps. When we read, we go from left to right. When I do math, I don't go from left to right. I go by my order of operations. I know I have to do my parentheses, but I have 2 math functions inside, so I have to go on beyond absolute value, square roots, exponents, and parentheses. Now I have My dear, multiplication and division from left to right always has to be done first. That means I have to divide first. So I'm going to take my 4.9. I'm going to have 3 separate math problems set up here. First number is always my dividend. Second number is always my divisor. So I'm going to take my 4.9 divided by 7. I know, according to lesson 1.8, that I can divide a decimal by a whole number. So I'm just going to raise up my decimal, and then I'm going to divide. And 7 goes into 49 7 times, because 7 times 7 is 49. So I don't have a remainder. So I know I have 0.7. That's what the answer is for this section right here. So now, my next step is I see I have subtraction. Once again, in subtraction and division, the first number has to be put in the correct place, because it will change my answer. Multiplication and division, or multiplication and addition, I can switch them around. It won't change my answer. So I'm going to start with 9.2 stacked, and then underneath it, lining up my decimals, filling in with zeros if I need, and I don't need, and then bringing down my decimals. So I got my decimals lined up, and I bring it straight down, and then I subtract. A handy dandy calculator, if I do it, I take 9.2 minus 0.7, I get 8.5. Still not done, am I? Because that's the answer to this whole thing. 2 math problems to answer my parentheses. Then I look here. So I had 36.4 plus the 8.5. I'm going to go ahead and put the 36.4 because it's larger on top. My 8.5, lining up my decimals, bringing down my decimals. I'd fill in with zeros if I needed to, but I don't. So I'm going to add. 4 and 5 is 9. 6 and 8 is 14. Carry my 1. And 3 plus 1 is 4. So in all of that, I get a final answer of 44 and 9/10. Now I may have gone a little fast. Just make sure you're hitting the space bar or the pause button so you can pause and keep up. This one looks even different because it doesn't have parentheses. So I skip my absolute value, square roots, and exponents in parentheses. Ask for several extra presents. I focus directly on my dear. Have to do all multiplication and division from left to right. And notice at the very beginning, I have a division problem. That's where I have to start. It does not say I do multiplication first, and then I do division second. It says multiplication and division from left to right. Whichever comes first, I do first. So I'm going to start with my division. I have 16, which is my dividend, divided by a decimal, which is my 2.5 as my divisor. So I know I cannot divide by a decimal. This is the first time we're really seeing that I don't have a decimal on the inside, and some people will go from the front of the number and just move it one time and end up with 1.6, which is not correct. The value of 16 does not change if I put a decimal behind it, but it sure does change if I put it in front. If I put a decimal in front of $16, I change my $16 to 16 cents. If mom and dad owe you $16 for doing your chores and they give you 16 cents instead, you know that makes a big difference. So we can always put our decimal at the end of a number. I never start it in front. When I move it one time on the outside, because I have my over, up, I have to move it once on the inside. So I make sure I start at the end of the number. So I have to add a 0 to hold that place value. Then I can raise it up. So now I'm going to divide 160 by 25 because 25 does not go into 1, does not go into 16, but it will go into 160. If I think about quarters, if I think about money, I know 4 quarters make $1, which is 100. Another quarter makes $1.25. 6 quarters makes $1.50, right? So if I don't have my calculator, I could do those pretty quick in my head just talking through it. But 6 times 25 on my calculator does show 150. When I subtract, I have 10 left over. Have to add a 0 at the end. This is the first time we've had to do this on the whole lesson. I hope you're paying attention. Add a 0 at the end and bring it down. I may have to do that 2, 3, 4 times. But I can see that when I bring down the 0, I have 100. And going back to the quarters, 4 quarters make $1, which is 100 cents. So I know 25 will go into 100 4 even times. Now, that's just my first problem. That's equal to 6.4. Now I got to look at my second problem, which is the multiplication. Still ignoring that subtraction because that's my last steps. Multiplication and division from left to right. Now I have to multiply. I can put them in any order. I personally prefer the one with the most digits to go up on top. So I'm going to switch those around. It will not change my answer either way. If you want to put the 3.2 on top, go ahead, but you will end up with different answers as you're doing your steps. I start with my 2, always start bottom right when I multiply. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 4 is 8. And 2 times, well, that's just 0, right? So I'm going to move on. The second number tells me to bring down, well, I circled one thing, so 1, 0. Then I can multiply my 3. 3 times 3 is 9, and 3 times 4 is 12. I put down my 2 and I carry my 1. 3 times 0 is 0, but I still have that 1. So I have to carry my 1. When I have all of those, then I know I'm adding to get to my next step. 6 and 0 is 0. 8 and 9 is 17. Carry my 1. 1 and 2 is 3. And then I have my 1. Don't forget on multiplication then, I have to go back and count my decimal spaces. So I have 1, 2, 3 at the top, 1 at the bottom. So I have 4 decimal spaces that I have to move 4 times from right to left. So it's going to go right in front. So now I have 2 numbers. I have 6 and 4/10, which was the answer to my first problem. I have 1,376 10,000ths, or 0.1376, for my second answer. Now what do? So now I'm going to do addition and subtraction, Aunt Sally, from left to right. And that's my only last step. So I have to make sure they go in the right order. 6.4 has to go on top. So I'm going to stack 6 and 4/10. I'm going to line up with my decimals because that's the first lesson at the top of that paper, right? Line up my decimals. When I line up my decimals, I see I have zeros to fill in. I have 3 of them. So I'm going to fill in with my zeros. Then I bring my decimal straight down. Once I've done that, I'm subtracting, and I can't take 6 from 0. I can't borrow from 0, so I'm going to borrow through. I have to go all the way over to the 4, and I'm going to borrow from it, and the 4 becomes a 3. Now, I can change it to a 10 and carry it, and then make it a 9, to make the next 0 a 10, and then make it a 9, to make the last 0 a 10. Or I can say, I know I'm borrowing through, so I'm going to have a 9, I'm going to have a 9, because I'm borrowing from it, and then my last one is a 10. Either way helps, but a lot of students look for any steps that they can eliminate, and if I do the borrow through, where I just do the 9, 9, 10, it still shows that I understand the math that I'm doing. If you don't get that, if that confuses you, you can ask me during our work time, or change it to a 10, and then borrow from it and make it a 9, to make the next one a 10, borrow from it, make it a 9, and then make the last one a 10. Once it's lined up and I have my decimal in the right place, then I can subtract now. So I have 10 minus 6, which is 4, 9 minus 7, which is 2, 9 minus 3, which is 6, 3 minus 1, which is 2. I still have that whole number that I haven't touched. It has to go in front. So my final answer, I've done, once again, 3 math problems to do these order of operations. I'm going to end up with 6 and, the way I say it correctly, 2,624 10,000ths. I know what's that because the 4 is in my 10,000ths position, but I say what this would normally be as a whole number. I say it is 2,624. But I let everyone know it's a decimal because then I say this decimal position, 10,000ths. All right, so that was a lot of work, and I understand, but as we get further along, we're going to get into some really long math problems. Anytime I go too fast, just pause the video. If you got lost, you didn't quite get it, rewind it, rewatch it, listen to it again, and practice it again. Then if you're not quite getting it, I'm here to help and I'll answer your questions. Once again, I'll always ask you to show me your book to make sure that you're paying attention and doing as I ask by following the video and taking your notes. Not just write down the answers. I gotta see your steps that I know you're paying attention. But then these problems will be for extra work. For anyone that really is struggling, we can work through these and I'll talk you through them so you understand exactly what you're doing. Before you get to your homework, which is this. So in your homework, page 59, you have questions 2 through 10, and then page 60, you have questions 1 through 6. Once again, I'll have some people working with me at the beginning of class. going through some missed questions or sections that they haven't quite understood, but I will give them enough time to watch the video. So everyone will be watching videos at different times and finishing their assignments at different times, but I'll give you enough time to work with me, watch the video, and start on your homework. If you have any questions then, please come and ask.